Well, good to see you all again. Good morning if you are on the West Coast. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and all between. I have no idea whether you can see me because there is an electrical outage in Berkeley, North Berkeley, this morning. So just raise your hands if you can see me. All right. Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay. There are some of you out there. The reason we are doing this live today, this morning, this afternoon, is because of all the news. A lot of news is taking place today, much of it in Washington. And I want to make sure that you get the story behind the story because the mainstream media is not doing a terribly good job, shall we say, in conveying what's really at stake. Now, I want you to know that I am a big fan of the media. I trust the media most of the time. Um, and I read the New York Times and I watch CNN and all of that stuff. But I don't rely entirely on the mainstream media for reasons that shall become very apparent to you. For example, as we speak, as I speak right now to you, there is a vote going on in the Senate on a very important piece of legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act. Okay, the Freedom to Vote Act. It has not been well explained. I don't know that you know very much about it. This is the act that, if it is passed, will preempt all of the state laws that are suppressing votes around the country. There are now 18 states that have passed 30 pieces of legislation to suppress votes of people likely to vote Democratic. And because of Donald Trump's big lie, a lot of those states got away with suppressing the votes. Other states are lining up to try to suppress votes. And so this piece of legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act, is extremely important. It will be voted on today. But what you ought to know about today's vote is that it's not a real vote. It's a test vote. So there may be headlines tomorrow about how the Freedom to Vote Act fails in the Senate. Pay no attention to those headlines. Because what's really happening is Chuck Schumer, majority leader of the Senate, is having a test vote. He wants to see how many Republicans will break ranks and join the Democrats. And my guess is zero. And this is really a demonstration to Senator Joe Manchin, West Virginia, to show him, and he contributed to the Freedom to Vote Act. He took the former piece of legislation and redid it, watered it down a little bit, and for all intents and purposes, it is his legislation. This is a demonstration to show him that if he does not come up with 10 Republican senators to basically overcome a filibuster, then there's going to be no Freedom to Vote Act. And he has got to understand that, because what really is needed, and the Democrats in the Senate are going to push this, is at least a carve out in the filibuster that allows 51 votes to pass voting rights legislation. That's what this is all about today. Story behind the story. Another story behind the story. This week, a big showdown again in Congress, not just the Senate, but also the House, about the big Build Back Better law bill that Biden has been pushing, Democrats have been pushing. All you hear from the mainstream media is that the price tag is 3.5 trillion, or that it's kind of an incredibly shrinking price tag, $3.5 trillion. That's all you hear. But you don't hear what's actually in the bill. Child care, pre-K, community college, paid family leave, climate change legislation, all kinds of things that Americans need in order to be more productive in the future, and the planet needs in order to survive. So instead of talking about all of these things, what the media has been talking about is 3.5 trillion and how it's getting shrunk. And you also hear that it's a social safety net bill. This is not a social safety net bill. It's really equipping families to be productive in the future. And it's also saving the planet. This has nothing to do with social safety nets. I mean, people hear the word social safety nets, the phrase, and they suddenly say to themselves, well, this is not something I need or I want. The other thing that you keep on hearing, and I was in an interview, every time I'm interviewed about this, the host questions me. It happened Friday on CNN. How can we afford it? How can we afford it? The price tag and how can we afford it? This is a complete ridiculous question. How can we afford it? We're the richest country in the history of the world. Of course we can afford it. We're richer than ever. You just repeal the Trump tax cut to the rich and to big corporations. That's $1.9 trillion right there. And you get a big chunk of the payment for this particular bill. And you also can go after trillionaires, or billionaires. We have 750 billionaires in this country. They increased their fortunes during the pandemic by over $2 trillion. If we had something like a windfall profits tax, remember windfall profits tax? We had it in the Second World War. Anybody who profiteered or anybody who monopolized or anybody who made a lot of money during the Second World War, that tax took away those windfall profits. We ought to do the same thing, because most of that $2 trillion that the billionaire class actually accumulated over what they already had, the billions they already had before the pandemic, had to do with their monopolization. They cornered the market. Look at Amazon, for example. So we have a windfall profits tax. That's another thing we can do. Look at the military. Our military budget is now, over a period of 10 years, $7.5 trillion. Who needs $7.5 trillion? We're talking about, a price tag for saving the environment and saving American families, making them more productive, of $3.5 trillion. Do the math. Of course we can afford it. This is an absurd kind of discussion. Can you afford it? But that's what the media keeps harping on. Can you afford it? Can you afford it? And then you also hear that this is a stalemate between between moderates. I love the term moderates, moderate Democrats like Sinema and Manchin, and progressive liberal Democrats. Well, that is not what's happening. Almost all of the Democrats in Congress support this legislation. Almost all of them. Joe Manchin, and Kirsten Sinema are the ones who don't. And because it's a 50-50 split in the Senate, you get this extraordinary power in the hands of two senators to basically call the shots. So don't fall for the media notion that this is a big problem between the progressives and the moderates. This is a problem with Sinema and Manchin. The other thing that I want to just point out to you, as long as we're talking about stories behind the stories, is how bad the economics reporting has been recently. Everywhere, every newspaper I look at, every web page of whether you're talking about the New York Times or the Washington Post, there is a story about inflation. Oh, inflation. Everybody's worried about inflation. Can I just make sure you understand there is no inflation? What you have are price increases due to bottlenecks, supply bottlenecks. You've got a lot of pent-up demand coming out of the pandemic. And you have, at the same time, with all that pent-up demand, you've got supply has not caught up with demand. It's not going to catch up with demand for probably 4 to 6 months. So obviously, prices are increasing. This is temporary price increases. That doesn't spell inflation. Larry Summers goes off about inflation. The Republicans that's all they talk about is inflation. Well, there is no accelerating inflation. There's no accelerating permanent price increases. It's temporary. But to the extent that there is anything going on in terms of prices that is good, it's not bad. It has to do with labor prices. Again, the media, last Friday's report on jobs, all you had from the media was, oh, terrible jobs report. Oh, awful jobs report. It's disappointing jobs report. Actually, very few media outlets, even to this day, 5 days after, have picked up the reality. What's really happening is that workers are essentially on strike. It's as if we have a general strike going on in this country because given that pent-up demand and given the increased demand for workers have a lot of power. And a lot of workers know that they have power. And so they're saying to themselves, look, I don't have to settle for the same lousy job I had before, the same job that was unhealthy and unsafe, that had very few benefits, where the pay was crappy. I don't have to settle for that. I can do something else, or I can take some time off. And that's what's happening. The quit rate is very, very high. The labor participation rate, that is the number of workers who are actually looking for jobs, actively looking for jobs, who are is very, very low, and either actively looking or already in jobs, very, very low. And the number of strikes, you get all this strike activity going on. That's not coming from nothing. It's coming from workers flexing their muscles. So instead of this being a, oh, woe is us, terrible jobs report story, it's actually a good story. It's about labor having much more power, much more impetus, and leverage than they had before. Um, and so I guess the bottom line on all of this is some very important things are going on right now in politics and the economy, but you are not getting the full imprint. You're not getting the story behind the story. You're not finding out what's really going on. And I find it very frustrating, which is why Inequality Media is doing all the work we are doing, and also why I've started a Substack, which I will announce to you. Kind of, can you see that? Can you see that? It's robertreich.substack.com. And this is all part of our effort to help you understand what is really happening, and not be misled by a mainstream media, and certainly Republicans. I mean, forget Fox News and forget the Republican media. I mean, don't even begin to get me started on that. Let me take your questions. I have some of your questions right here. You have time for questions? Just a few questions. All right, let's see. One of you, Naomi. Naomi, are you out there? Put up your hand. Naomi? Okay, Naomi. You asked, you said, quote, I'm beginning to feel hopeless about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. It's so disappointing that after 4 years of Trump, we now have Democrats in control of Congress and the White House, and yet nothing seems to get done. Do you think Manchin and Sinema will ever compromise? Naomi, I think that Manchin is in the process of compromising. He and Joe Biden know each other very well. They are adults. They've been around politics a long time. I think the wild card, honestly, is Sinema. I have no idea what she wants, and she's not saying what she wants. She just wants to be the center of attention. Now, the stakes are so high in terms of both the Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill that I think that they will come around. I think what Joe Biden has to do, and Chuck Schumer, is essentially say to Manchin and Sinema, your future political career is on the line here. And if you don't cooperate, that is, the rest of the Democratic Party, is not going to support you in your future elections. But more importantly, if you do cooperate, here are the things that we can deliver for you, for Arizona, for West Virginia. Okay, let's see. I'm going to combine two questions here. One is from David. David, put up your hand so I can see you. Okay. David, you ask, how do you see the worker shortage resolve? Do you think businesses will pay their employees more and do more to retain good employees? And then there are two questions from Sean of a similar nature. Sean, you ask, do you think we're experiencing a wake-up period in regards to the value of labor? Is it conceivable that the ongoing ITSE negotiations, that's the Hollywood employees negotiations, and service industry wake-up call, will positively affect labor going forward? Sean and David, your guess is as good as mine. I would like to think that we are at something of an inflection point here. And I think this is due not just to labor having more bargaining leverage right now, but it's also due to what has happened coming out of the pandemic. I kind of carry on a free-floating focus group. That is, I talk to a lot of people, and I talk to them not just in Berkeley and not just the West Coast, but around the country. And I keep hearing from people that they feel differently about their jobs, their lives. They're reevaluating who they are, where they are. They're thinking and asking themselves deep questions about their future. Life is very short. One thing that we've experienced because of the pandemic, and it's similar to what happened after World War II, and apparently what happened after World War I, is that a lot of people ask themselves some fundamental questions about a kind of reckoning. if you will. This is life, folks. You only live once. And that means you don't have to settle for a crappy job or lousy wages or lousy working conditions or doing something you don't want to do. I think that's going on too. And if that's going on, this is a much more permanent social change, so even social revolution than we've seen before. Okay, I have a question here from Segvikor. Is that how you pronounce it? Segvikor? What kind of a name is that, Segvikor? A quote, how can the U.S. make true democratic progress when so many in the House and Senate have such vested interests in big business? What President Carter purportedly described as unlimited political bribery. And you refer to Manchin's coal interest, merely being one recent and grotesque example. Well, you're right. I mean, Manchin is very much in the pockets of the coal industry. It's not just because West Virginia is dependent on coal. I mean, very small number of West Virginians. The last number I saw was 5% of the West Virginia workers are in any way dependent on coal. And coal is shrinking. That number continues to drop. The future of West Virginia is not in coal. The future of West Virginia is in wind and solar and other energy sources and diversifying into other areas. So why is Manchin so hostile to doing anything about the environment? Well, I think he is in the pocket of the coal industry, and he also has his own personal coal interest. He owns a stake, or he did own a stake, and he gets dividends, big time, from a coal mine. And Sinema also. I mean, she's raking it in. Big business is giving her a huge amount of money. She's received $500,000 from pharmaceutical and health product industry alone. I mean, this is graft. This is bribery. I don't care who it is. The Republicans have been doing this for years, and I think it's shameful, frankly. And Kirsten Sinema has got to come around. So, Segvikor, if that's your name, in response to your question, how can we make progress? We can't make progress if there's big money in politics. This is why the Freedom to Vote Act is so important. This is why today's sort of sample vote, it's not really a real vote, as I said earlier, is a prelude to what's going to be a big and very important vote later on in the fall. Anyway, I have other questions for you. I'd like to go on talking, but I want to thank all of you for tuning in, listening, remind you, please, to subscribe. And I want to, I don't say this enough. I have incredibly talented colleagues at Inequality Media, starting with Heather Lofthouse and Kyle Parker and Court Fuller and Katie Milne and Kara Siegel and Michael Lahanis Calderon. These are wonderful, wonderful people. I am so grateful to all of them for helping me every single day get the word out to you. Good luck, be safe, and be grateful. Do not be discouraged. Don't be fatalistic. Don't get cynical. Now, politics is a tough game. I understand. I've been at it for 50 years. Don't give up the fight. Thank you.